Welcome to Sinister Heroes. I'm your host, Danny Iniquitous. Thank you for tuning in. If you're new to the channel, this is a channel about Dungeons and Dragons. Every now and again, we dip into some other stuff, but mainly we're a Dungeons and Dragons channel. This week, we are going to talk about the God of Justice, Tyr. But before that, I want to send a big shout out to our Patreon supporters. We love you guys. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. And a big thank you to our friends at Critical Failures. We're part of a live stream game on Wednesday nights. Check us out. The link to both of those is in the description, as well as a link to one of our other channels. With that out of the way, let's jump right in to Tyr. So I chose the god Tyr because it does have to coincide with my current character in this new campaign we're in on Critical Failures. So Tyr is a deity in Faerun. Now, yes, he is also a god of the Norse mythology, and that's a lot of where his lore and his story comes from. So there are some crossovers there, but there is a distinction kind of in this world where the Norse gods are kind of separate from this god of Tyr, but anyone who worships the Norse gods and the Norse pantheon can always be granted spells and abilities through Tyr, as he does kind of assume the responsibility of helping out the clerics and the worshippers of that religion. Tyr is a god of justice, order, and war. Those lovely things all kind of go really well together. And we're going to start first with a little bit of a description of what he looks like. Tyr was portrayed as blind or with bloody bandages over his eyes and missing his right hand. And he did not try to hide his bandage or his stump. He usually was shown as a burly noble warrior with a powerful build and a bearded face. Tyr was often shown wielding powerful magic sword or a magic warhammer and dressed in light armor or chainmail. So very, very, very classic Norse warrior. The only difference is he's not blind in the Norse mythology. Tyr does have his eyesight, but it is really intricate to Tyr currently that that's kind of part of the things that separate him. Now, Tyr was a strong-spirited and noble person. He was considered the bravest and the most honorable of all the Aesir of the Norse pantheon. Again, that's kind of where they come from. They're the Aesir, like the gods. He was primarily concerned with punishment of wrongdoers and the generally furthering of law and good in this world. Tyr hated duplicity, trickery, rule-breaking, and wanton destruction. He likewise hated lies and breaking of oaths, and was disgusted by persons who earned from such things. For his own part, he never would break a promise. Tyr was a fair judge, but he was hard to understand to those outside his faith, as they more readily perceived him as a stern and rigid punisher. On the other hand, he was seen as a brave father figure to his followers. In truth, he was well aware that the lawful utopia would never be possible in the imperfect material plane. Yet this did not stop him from trying to make the world a better place for his mortal followers. He wanted his followers to see themselves as a perfect family, not made of perfect individuals, but rather of members who tried and wanted to be perfect, who acted out of trust, courage, and love toward each other. His knowledge that such a dream would never be achieved among the mortal realm filled him with genuine sadness. Tyr was at first more willing than many other gods to manifest in some form or another to his followers. Because of his fierce feelings of fatherly protection toward them, by the late 14th century DR, however, Tyr had tired of appearing in the realms and began limiting his appearances to cases with important repercussions that were not obvious to mortals. Tyr urged the establishment of moral and ethical codes for sentient beings in all lands. So this is really, really kind of what Tyr is. All that really kind of condenses down to he tries to be a perfect father to his followers. He considers them like his children. He wants to protect them. He wants to show them the right way. And though he knows it will never be perfect and it will never be what he dreams it to be, he still always tries to make the world better than what it was before. And that's really, really important to who Tyr is, because that's his fundamental core. As the only lawful member of the Norse pantheon, Tyr faded largely from prominence. For this reason, he sought a means of strengthening his power by obtaining worshippers from other worlds. He chose the crystal sphere of realm space and submitted himself to the authority of the overgod Ao. So this is where the separation from being part of the Norse pantheon exists. Here, in when they're talking about different realms and crystal spheres, the way the D&D universe exists is because it's a whole bunch of crystal orbs floating around in almost like a sequence of space, like in their own orbits. Each one of those crystals is their own worlds. So if you were to travel from the world that D&D takes place in and goes to another world, you don't have the same deities in existence there that you do here. It's kind of tricky. So what ultimately ends up being is if you try to go from one crystal sphere to another crystal sphere and you have divine magic, you have to reach out to the whoever rules those domains or portfolios in that world. And if they're good, then usually that deity will just uphold the promises that the other deity had and grant you those powers. It gets really, really tricky. This is really more so of how in depth and heavy-handed your DM is in regards to stuff like this. But when you don't actually ever really leave the sphere, you kind of create an aspect of yourself that exists in that sphere. So although it's very similar, it is still very, very different because you're technically not the same person. So when he submitted himself to the authority of the overgod Ao, he's not leaving that crystal sphere and then going to this new crystal sphere. He's kind of asking Ao for permission to exist there as its own entity. It's really tricky. It's really crazy. The lore gets really skewed at this point, but it's just kind of like very difficult to understand. That's kind of like my best way to describe it. So the first recorded instance of Tyr on Toril was in Lake of Stream region, circa 2600 DR. A warrior known as Baldurs and a group of priests were said to have met with Tyr in person in the mountains near the northern border of Tormish. In response, Baldurs crafted a mighty artifact, Balance of Baldurs. For at least 5,000 years of Faeronian history, Tyr also seemed to appear under other names. Aknatyr, Iltyr the Blind, All-Seeing Eye, Artyr, Judge of All, and Anaktyr, among others. Under one of these names, he was a member of Jamahadanth pantheon before that empire's fall. In Kalamishan, Anaktyr had been worshipped far longer than Tyr had been in other parts of Faerun. For example, Anaktyr's followers were known as to have slain the great worm Rivenargaloth, the darkly pious, in the marching mountains of 284 DR. This is like ancient world history in Faerun. Among the Kalishites, religious legends suggested that the god who was Tyr passed on his portfolio to another at the end of each millennia, and that Anaktyr was actually an earlier Tyr who passed his portfolio onto the Norse newcomer. So this is kind of where everything gets really skewed, because according to this, there was a similar Tyr entity, and then Tyr from the Norse religion came over and wanted to be part and wanted to kind of grow himself here. And so this Tyr passed on his power to that Tyr, which is really, really unusual way to put this, because a lot of gods do this through aspects. When a god stops being worshipped to and starts to change who he is, or they only start to worship a certain part of that god will usually go and fade out and then kind of reemerge as an aspect of that god. That's not really what happens here because of the Norse mythology existing and their own Tyr being there. Tyr, in his most recent form, first made a major historical impact on the world of Toril in a campaign to pacify the remnants of the fallen empire of Jahamdath. I'm sorry, every time I read it, it's difficult. In the year of the striking lance, 247 ADR. This was known as the Procession of Justice, in which the god himself appeared on Toril by portal near future Algon in Turmish to lead a host of 10 scores of archons. Archons are very powerful celestial beings against the chaotic and evil forces arrayed in the Vihulun Reach in the remains of the fallen empire. So they kind of just... Tyr shows up with like an army of very powerful celestial beings and just cleans house and just purges this area from chaos and evil forces. Ilmater, the god, aligned himself with Tyr in 243 DR, being impressed by the sacrifices made by Tyr. And the conflict continued until 238 DR. At the end of the Great Procession, most of Tyr's Archon warriors had been slain or banished, but he was successful in destroying vax'ildan, a god of anarchy. And by this time, Tyr was committed to inspiring justice on Toril as a whole. And then later the god Torm joined them to complete the triad. And Tyr was the leader of this triad between Torm, Tyr, and Ilmater. Now, understand that Tyr was still very, very new here. He's very new to this world, to this existence, to this plane. And he sees this god of anarchy and chaos, just like ravaging what used to be an empire that when he first arrived at were the people that followed him and believed in him and worshipped him. So it was a personal vendetta, but it was also his first real big moment in the real world to show that he is not just a god who sits in the back, that he will avenge and protect his people. Which no other god really leads an army to fight another god like that. It's very, very rare that that happens. However, the faith of Tyr did not become a dominant one in Faerun until shortly after the establishment of the Standing Stone, when most of the other members of the Pantheon were already well established in their roles. But after some 1,600 years since the Procession of Justice, Tyr successfully had become known all over Faerun. Now, the Standing Stone is something that Io did in order to kind of depict who was a deity and who wasn't. And to kind of establish these are your major deities for proof for everyone. Because there's a certain level of power, people started considering themselves deities and trying to convince other people that. And it was kind of pulling divine energy in all sorts of directions. So Ao just kind of put everything together and said, this is where all the divinity goes to in respect to all the gods. So, Tyr had lost his right hand to Kezef the Chaos Hound in a test of honor and strength of will. The Circle of Greater Powers had previously banned all mortals and powers from any contact with Kezef, but he was still free to consume souls, and a coalition of gods joined together to stop the Chaos Hound once and for all. This alliance included Tyr. They pursued the primordial beast into the Barrens of Doom and Despair, where they offered him a deal. They would lift the ban on him if he could escape from the chains forged for him by Gond. Kezef insisted that if they were truly a fair challenge, then Tyr must be willing to place his right hand into the Elder Evil's mouth. Tyr agreed. Kezef was enchained. The chain was anchored deep in Coctus in Pandemonium. And Mystra placed an enchantment to prevent the chains from ever being severed. Furious, Kezef bit off Tyr's hand. It was said that he feasted on the god's hand, drawing power from it for centuries. This is very similar for what happened in the Norse religion. And this is kind of like the last testament of how brave Tyr is. Because this primordial monster, Kezef, was ultimately going to devour everything. And that's why the Circle of Greater Powers kind of came together and established a way to isolate Kezef so he couldn't get followers, people couldn't sell their souls to him, and souls would stop traveling towards him. So it's very strange how the gods deal within themselves, because they should have just tried and purge this evil, but as a greater primordial beast, it's not exactly easy to kill somebody like that. Killing any entity that's beyond mortality does require a lot of tricks and knowing how to kill it. Like, you can't kill demons on Toril. If you kill them, they get sent back to their realm. And then they kind of just reconstitute themselves over the time. Same with devils. So the only way you can kill them is to go into their realm, find them there, and then kill them there. When you get to the power of gods and deities, they get killed sometimes and come right back. A lot of it has to do with their name and their legacy and their worshippers. As long as that continues, the god really can't die. So it's very tricky to kill someone who's a primordial beast, who's been in existence for all time, living as fear. Because even if you're scared of something, you're still kind of worshipping that fear, as you often kind of live your life avoiding that fear. It puts that fear on a great precedence and pedestal, and that still draws divine energy from it. Thank you so much if you made it this far into the video. Definitely hit that like and subscribe button. Really quick, justice and honor and goodness is all great, but understand Tyr still punishes those who do not see fit to uphold to those morals or ethics, which makes him really enticing as a deity, because he does still have that heavy hand, which is awesome. Thank you so much for making it this far into the video. If you did, definitely check us out on Wednesday nights with our live stream game that we're part of with the guys over at Critical Failures, and check us out on our other channel, Veldcrest. Thank you so much for giving a spooky kid a chance.